Welcome to This Week in Local, a Localogy podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Localogy analysts Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Charles Laughlin, joined by my co-host Mike Boland. Mike, how you doing?
Hey, Charlie. Doing well.
So what's on your mind, Mike?
So this week, we're looking at sort of an ongoing theme, a new version of it, but an ongoing theme that we've talked about in the past on this show, which is like the places where AI is working or has the potential to work and the places that it's falling flat. And, as just quick background, the theme there is that, like any other technology, in early stages, it's just sort of being thrown against several walls, right, to see if it sticks. And then, it's too early to really know, like, if you look at past technologies, killer apps take time to figure out. There's that exploratory process. Like when the iPhone came out first, no one was envisioning the things that ended up being the killer apps, like, Uber and Spotify and Snapchat, et cetera, right? So we're in that much earlier stage, but that exploratory process, I don't want to slam it because it's like, it's necessary. So that's where we are now. And it's been interesting to watch. As we've talked about in the past on this show, there are a few sort of really fitting applications that really make sense and some that don't. So an example of one that makes sense that we've talked about before, just to level set, is web.com and Nextdoor, who have launched these sort of writing assistants. So you have, not natural writers that are either SMBs or people on Nextdoor. And this helps them just sort of generate posts or like Brainstormer as a starting point. And it really makes a lot of sense in terms of just like, addressing real pain points. I think that's the common thread, addressing real pain points versus the sort of solutions in search of problems, which we're going to see a lot of that too. So that's really just the backdrop or the buildup to what we're looking at this week, which is over the past week, we saw some great examples, some more recent examples of things on sort of both sides of that divide. One example of one that we think it makes a lot of sense, and another not so much. So to quickly just sort of to pull on those threads, the one thing that we saw that may work or really makes a lot of sense is Intuit has launched what it calls Intuit Assist, which is an AI-based assistant that sort of like hangs over or exists across its entire suite of financial software. And we all know those. It's QuickBooks, it's TurboTax, it's Credit Karma. They even own MailChimp, so they do some email marketing as well. So a few examples of how this is going to work is, I'll give the example that I used the word pain point before. I don't think there's any greater pain point that we all feel than doing your taxes. Yeah. So this is sort of an AI assistant that's going to do things that is more, proactively providing advice as you're entering all your inputs, as you're going through your taxes. It does things like, hey, you should consider filing as an S Corp, or just strategic things like that. Or it also acts as sort of a reactive chatbot that you can ask questions to. Now, one thing that may jump out here is that Intuit has always utilized AI to sort of lead you along the process of doing your taxes. You enter your W-2 information, blah, blah, blah. It leads you through sort of a wizard, and then it helps you. But what this is doing is similar to across the tech space, all of these things that were AI, AI's been around for a while, but in this most recent inflection of like large language models and the technology coming out of companies like OpenAI, all of these tools are sort of getting this like what I like to call a brain transplant. So that's what Intuit's doing here. It's up-leveling its AI stuff across the board. And it's not just in individual apps within its suite. The cool thing I think it's doing is that it is sort of opening the door for some of these crossover integrations. So one example is, like I said, they own MailChimp and they own QuickBooks. They can generate email marketing content in MailChimp based on the product inventory that you have in QuickBooks. And that's just one example of some of the sort of integrations I think they're going to discover as they advance this. But I think it's, again, a very sort of fitting AI integration because it's saving people time. It's helping them with that major pain point of doing their taxes and other things like bookkeeping. And for all those reasons, we think it's just a strong start. On paper, inherently, this is one of those AI integrations that makes sense. So moving on, by contrast to one that we don't think is as strong or maybe challenged, DoorDash has launched a voice-based AI agent, and what its job is to field incoming phone calls to restaurants. And this is sort of driven by the fact that DoorDash, it sort of has provided its own data that most customers prefer to call a restaurant. However, most of those calls go unanswered. So this sort of chatbot is meant to sort of be a safety net for that. Now the challenge here, however, and why I think this is not the best sort of idea or integration, is that this pushes against a very sort of deep-rooted cultural sentiment, which is that people hate automated voice response systems. And that's essentially what this is. I mean, the performance might be better. Goes back to what I was saying earlier, brain transplant, new AI infusions with more sort of GPT-based technologies, much better than the AVR systems of the past. But the fact remains that people do not like to sort of deal with those phone trees. And I think that's going to be an inherent challenge here. I think another challenge is that DoorDash has expressly stated that the point of this thing, its primary goal, is to help restaurants sort of make upsells. So part of this is going to be to field calls and to make recommendations to say like, oh, you ordered the Kung Pao chicken. You should also consider, XYZ. So it's all about sort of upsells. And it's based on just like all of DoorDash's data in the past. That's the training set to, complementary food items. That makes sense. But I think that the goal here is to increase order sizes. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it should, balance some of the customer needs in the UX, particularly because of that initial problem I mentioned, which is to get over that hump that they might not like this at first. So not only is it an IVR system, but it's one that's trying to squeeze more money out of you. So, we're skeptical about that, but we'll see how it works in practice. I think that's the key point here. Like our speculations are one thing, but, the market reaction is really going to be the telling thing for all of things, and it's going to be a moving target.
So that's interesting. I was actually having a chat this morning with somebody who works at AWS, and we were talking about, AI basically taking over the decision tree, phone, AVR systems, and how welcome that is because everyone hates those. And then the conversation sort of pivoted to, will AI ever be? We kind of agreed that it's going to take over customer support phone banks.
Yep.
But is it going to take over call center sales, telesales?
Yeah.
There's a lot more doubt between us whether that would actually happen. And it's
outbound. Outbound is more challenging than inbound.
Inbound, right? Maybe.
Yeah.
Outbound, I'm having a hard time seeing. I'm not saying never, but at least in the near term. And it kind of gets back to this notion of, can AI do nuance? Because the process of sales is the process of, and we're kind of having this conversation, and it's like, sales is about tap dancing, and reacting in the moment to what people say and trying to have a good answer for it. I suppose AI can do that, but will it be able to do that anytime soon, as well as a good salesperson can? Yeah. I don't know.
I think
that's a question that we kind of left unanswered in this conversation.
If it does, it's going to augment rather than replace the salesperson's job. Like I should say, for example, in defense of DoorDash, what they're doing here, I didn't mention this, is that it's really sort of the first line of defense. And there are operators standing by. There are live operators standing by. It wants to infuse some, efficiencies.
I imagine there never will be no operator standing by.
Yeah.
Fewer and fewer.
It wants to infuse some efficiencies by, handing off maybe some of the rote sort of question and answering. And in an outbound sense, maybe that's the case as well. Maybe like, when you got a warm lead, or if the IVR can detect it's a warm lead, then you pass off to your best salesperson, that type of thing.
Yeah, or it can detect how close to purchase it is, and how easily it can be converted into a purchase. I'm trying to picture AI closing a sale, taking the credit. I mean, why not? Of course, I'm sure it can.
Will it demand a commission is the question.
Yes. Well, I think eliminating the commission is the whole point of this, right? Anyway, so, I thought that was interesting. What DoorDash is doing, if it's in the broader spectrum of, AI sort of replacing customer support, or at least making it much more efficient.
Mhm.
Okay, I can sort of see it. I can say that you will not be in charge of upselling Chinese food. I mean, that's
Right.
you don't know what goes with Kung Pao chicken. So
That's too low margin to justify a live person
okay,
to even do that. Yeah.
fair enough. That one is $3, maybe upsell for $2 more, whatever.
Yeah, that's different
Okay.
than life insurance. Yeah.
And I also am not sure I believe that most people like calling a restaurant through. All my DoorDash orders are done purely online, purely through keystrokes.
Oh,
I do
me
not like
too.
that.
Yeah, throughout life in general, whenever I can eliminate talking to someone, I
I've always been
usually
that person too. Yeah.
sounds terrible, but yeah. So
Podcasters
I'm
who
not
hate talking to
sure.
people.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the data that I cited from DoorDash, most people prefer to call. If that is,
I never believe it when I hear that. Yeah.
yeah, maybe we'll look a bit into that in terms of like any sort of demographic segmentation or anything like that that may map that data.
Okay, I'm going to shift gears. I wrote something earlier, actually today or this week, let's just say this week, about a company I write about a lot, buy now, pay later. It's the public stock and buy now, pay later. So you want to see how that industry is doing. You kind of watch a firm stock price. Well, its CEO, Max Levchin, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, was at a Goldman Sachs conference, I think this week or last week, I'm sorry. And it was written up in something that I was looking at. And a big part of the theme of this write-up anyway was his comments about regulation, which is something I've written about. Buy now, pay later is right in the crosshairs of regulators because it's causing all kinds of problems, with consumer debt and et cetera, getting millennials to buy too many shoes, all that kind of thing. And so regulators from Australia to the UK are either looking at or beginning to regulate buy now, pay later. So it's, those wheels are already turning. So the question is going to land on people like Max Levchin about, okay, what is your position on regulation? And of course, not of course, but the of course is kind of going to be relevant in a second. He says, well, we welcome regulation and we want to work closely with regulators, blah, blah, blah. And we are willing to talk to them about our lending practices and open our books and all the good things that you say if you've consulted with your PR person before stepping on stage in anticipation of this question. So, this kind of raised something that's kind of floating out there with all the regulation around AI and a lot of other things is, do tech execs really mean it when they say, I welcome regulation? And I would argue, probably not surprisingly, that I'm skeptical. I think it's something you see a lot of tech execs do it. We've seen it from Sam Altman and Sundar and Satya and all these guys, basically saying, of course, regulation inevitable. Let's welcome it. Let's join hands and do it together. And I think on one level that's smart, because if it's going to be regulation, you want to be in the room with talking to the regulators who are going to regulate you if it is in fact inevitable. So on one level, it's just a good business decision, but a big part of me just sees cynicism all over this. And I think it's a common theme that you keep coming back to anytime regulation and tech are mentioned in the same sentence, is the sort of, the smiley face. Of course, we're all for regulation. It's about time. We have a few ideas. Let's get together and talk about it. And I just think that's mostly BS. And I don't know what you think, Mike.
I see two sides of this. One, sort of the cynical, it's all PR. I think that's certainly possible, especially if you're talking about AI, which is an industry that has so much fear, uncertainty, doubt, bad press around it, that from a PR perspective, that's particularly important to sort of have a cover your ass move. We've invited government in to sort of regulate this. So I think in an industry where PR is such a big issue, that PR move makes a lot of sense. Now, strategically speaking, they might actually be sincere on some levels, because if you look at what's happening here, it's mostly tech giants, it's mostly big tech who have said, yes, we welcome regulation. Some of the startups, you haven't heard that so much from them. And that's because in some ways, regulation favors the incumbents. Now,
Especially
that's not the case.
Yeah.
Now that's not the case if you're talking about antitrust regulation. That's a different discussion. I'm talking about regulating standards and practices and stuff like that. When you're talking about that, big tech and the sort of high stakes game they're playing and the investor confidence they need to instill is emboldened when you have environments that are more predictable, and less volatile. Regulation breeds those things. Whereas a Wild West environment with no regulation favors, the challengers and the startups. So I think for that reason, that second reason, they could be sort of sincere in wanting it for obviously very self-serving purposes. But yes, they could be sincere.
I mean, I think, yeah, I granted, but I think when it's the big platforms, I think they probably see, as you sort of were saying, regulation as an opportunity to, I hate to say rig the game because that's a little strong, but to create an environment that protects their incumbent status.
A stable environment.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. And in that case, if you're OpenAI, it's one thing. If you're an AI startup, it's quite a different thing. Now back to the buy now, pay later example I gave, which is way different from AI. It's a financial regulation concern. What was kind of interesting in the way Max Levchin positioned this is, yes, regulation very important. We'll be involved, but there will be a cost. And so, so you then sort of say, well, regulations, of course, it's inevitable, but it's going to make our product more expensive. So if you really think it's important, we'll do it. But so I think there's a two-sidedness to the messaging as well.
Sure.
So there's a transparency that, okay, yes, we're for regulation, but the aside that comes after that really reveals how they really feel about it, which is, go ahead, we're going to pass the cost along to the consumer, et cetera.
Now, the other sort of interesting factoid, fun fact, connective tissue in all of that is that Max used to be obviously at PayPal, part of the PayPal mafia, along with Elon Musk. We have to, mention Elon Musk at least once per episode. And, he's one of the
separation with Elon Musk or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But he's one of the reason I mentioned it. He's one of the sort of tech leaders who has raised his hand for oversight in AI.
Yeah. And again, AI is a completely different animal because people think it's going to, summon the beast and lead to our destruction. No one thinks that about buy now, pay later. It thinks it might make your millennial cousin go broke, but but it's not going to, start wars.
It's not going to lead to Skynet.
No. So the AI so the imperative for regulation in AI is obvious and intense and way, way different than what I was referring to. But so I think you could infer a more benign motivation for wanting AI regulation based on a human understanding of the potential for it,
Yeah.
But I think I think also understanding that as a business person, understanding that, this could lead to all these potentially negative consequences, that you want to get ahead of it, just from not an altruistic perspective, but just a pure business perspective.
Yeah.
So I think that's, it's sort of the same thing. You could just decide, oh, that's cynicism or that's just practicality or pragmatism. They can be the same thing, in this sense. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Mike, you want to get on to who won the week?
Sure. So I'll go first. My who won the week is consumers, and particularly consumers of Apple products, given that USB-C has finally come to sort of the iOS universe. It's been already present in a lot of Apple products like MacBooks and others, but that sort of federation or unification of charging and connectivity as a standard is a good thing. It's going to lead to some short-term pain. We're going to have lots of leftover lightning cables all around our junk drawers and such.
I have about 18 at home right now.
Yeah.
So,
and then you have hotel lamp side, table side lamps with the, USB-A connector. That's USB-A will actually still come around. There basically is going to be a lot of room for adapters. That's the other winner here is like the high margin, adapter companies, including Apple. But anyway, consumers in the long run, because after that sort of short transition, painful period, just the sort of unification of USB-C, not just within Apple products, like being able to interchange between your MacBook Pro, which again already had USB-C, and your iPhone, but also across other products, non-Apple products, where USB-C is a common standard for charging, connectivity, etc. Just being able to sort of not have two sets of cables if you're an Apple user is a win.
Okay, there's a win for you. Over time, I'll sort out which cables I need to throw away and which cables I need to keep.
Yeah.
And I have so many. I've just got vats full of redundant or obsolete charging cables from technologies of years past. I should take a picture of it sometime and send it to you.
You should see my my smartphone tech museum I have. Everything goes back to a BlackBerry. Yeah.
I've got an old BlackBerry in a drawer somewhere, maybe two. Anyway, mine is my Who Won the Week is none other than Aaron Rodgers. So why do I say Aaron Rodgers? We all know what happened. He blew out his Achilles, and his season's over, et cetera, et cetera. And this is not because I'm a Chicago Bears fan. I'll explain why. So I've always had this theory that the best job, not just in sports, but maybe the best job in the world, is being an NFL backup quarterback. Yeah. You get paid millions of dollars just to walk up and down the sidelines with a baseball cap on and a clipboard. Now it's maybe an iPad, but clipboard, iPad, doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not saying it's an easy job. You got to be ready to step in, and they often do have to step in. But come on, I mean, you spend most of the year walking up and down the sidelines with a clipboard, making millions of dollars a year. Well, Aaron Rodgers kind of got there in a more painful way. I mean, that's a painful injury. I forgot what he's making or what his contract says. It's a lot. So basically, for 4 snaps, he's going to get tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah, it's tens of millions a year. It's in that range.
Yeah. And okay, Aaron, you won the week.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, the way he got to that point was, most second string quarterbacks have that job you mentioned with the clipboard.
Oh, he had it under Brett Favre. Yeah.
Right. So, but most quarterbacks have that job, a second string job at a second string salary. He's now getting a second string job at a first string salary because his contract has already been established.
You're right about that. There are the occasional washouts who get the big contract, then they wash out and end up as backups, and they still get some of that money for a while or whatever. But yes, in this case, if he even gets back on the field ever, and again, I don't wish him the end of his career or anything like that. That's not what this is about. It's just about 4 snaps for tens of millions of dollars. Not bad.
Well, conversely, I guess you could say who lost the week is the Jets. Even though they won that game, that Monday night game, they lost in that they still have to pay that salary. But they were looking good Monday night. Oh
yeah, I mean, I wish them well. I mean, I have nothing against the Jets. I'm a Chicago Bears fan. All right, that may say a lot about why I picked Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
You beat us fair and square over and over again. Okay.
Yeah. Well, as a Bears fan, you have many more years of leftover angst towards Aaron Rodgers than where he is now in New York, as opposed to
I'd much rather see him fail on the field than have an injury. I just want to make that very clear. But I think it's going to work out okay for him. That was really my point. Mike, enough about this. Why don't you read us out?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Charlie. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. You can find the show on all major podcast networks and find out more at localogy.com. So please subscribe, like, and comment. Your engagement helps others find us. So I'm Mike Boland with Charles Laughlin. Our producer is Dara Sweat. So thanks for listening and see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Localogy's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.